Segment 1. The Aztecs.
They began as nomads who settled the Valley of Mexico in AD 1200. By AD 1500, they had built a capital city that rivaled the glory of London and Paris. Just 20 years later, though, one of America's first great civilizations would lie in ruins, destroyed by seekers of gold. The Aztecs built an empire the same way the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans had, by conquering their neighbors. After settling in the fertile valley at the heart of present-day Mexico, this small but fierce band of warriors struck out against rival tribes, eventually bringing them all under Aztec control. As their empire grew, the Aztecs built a spectacular capital, Tenochtitlan, to honor their gods. Fortified on an island on Lake Texcoco, Tenochtitlan boasted magnificent flat-top pyramids, crowned by temples to their gods. Inside, the Aztecs paid their debt to the sun god. The Aztecs believed that unless they offered human blood to the god, the sun wouldn't rise the next day. But as important as religion was to the Aztecs, it was their economic system that fed the empire's growth. Conquered tribes were taxed heavily. They were required to send fine cloth, food, and jewelry to the Aztec emperor, or else. At the height of their empire in the early 1500s, the Aztecs were ruled by a man named Montezuma. Like many European kings of that time, Montezuma was seen by his people as a divine ruler, a ruler appointed by God. Montezuma's kingdom covered 200,000 miles of Central America and included more than 25 million subjects. His army was 400,000 soldiers strong. Despite his empire's wealth and power, Montezuma was about to face a crisis that would threaten everything his people had built. The Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés, had arrived in Mexico, and he was headed for Tenochtitlan. But from the reports he received, Montezuma didn't recognize Cortés as a foreign invader. With his white skin and beard, Cortés resembled a figure from ancient Aztec mythology, the great god Quetzalcoatl. Banished from Mexico in the distant past, the legendary Quetzalcoatl had vowed to return one day and reclaim his throne. It so happened that Cortés arrived during the year 1 read on the Aztec calendar, the exact year Quetzalcoatl was supposed to return. Was this white stranger an Aztec god? Montezuma decided not to attack, a decision he would regret. He allowed the Spaniards to reach the outskirts of the Aztec capital in November of 1519. Before long, Montezuma realized his mistake and sent gifts to appease the Spaniards. He sent envoys bearing gold, hoping the strangers would take the gifts and leave. All Montezuma's gifts did, however, was prove to Cortés that the Aztecs were rich with gold. Cortés was now more determined than ever to reach Tenochtitlan. When he finally got there, Cortés was not disappointed. With a population of 250,000, Tenochtitlan surpassed even the largest cities in Europe. Montezuma was equally impressive. For his meeting with Cortés, he dressed the part of the New World's most powerful man. As the two sides approached each other, the air grew thick with excitement. Cortés explained he'd come in peace, the ambassador of a great emperor from far across the sea. Montezuma welcomed him as a most honored guest, and invited him to stay in one of his palaces. Friendliness, though, soon gave way to fear. News arrived that the Aztecs had attacked Veracruz, the colony Cortés had established along the coast 200 miles away. Montezuma denied responsibility. But Cortés did the unthinkable. He placed Montezuma under arrest in his own palace. Amazingly, the emperor submitted without a struggle. To this day, no one knows why. Montezuma's authority gradually weakened. The Aztecs did stage an uprising against the Spanish invaders, but not led by Montezuma. The Spaniards claimed Montezuma was stoned by his own people. The Aztecs insisted he was murdered by the Spanish. Whatever the case, by the summer of 1520, the situation in Tenochtitlan had reached total chaos. Cortés and his men decided to grab as much gold as possible and make a run for it. With the Spaniards retreating, the Aztecs might have recovered. But the conquistadors had brought with them something much more deadly than rifles and cannons: disease. The Aztecs were devastated by what they called the Great Rash, smallpox. This highly infectious and fatal virus left them stricken with high fever, aches, and blisters all over their bodies. More than half the population would die of the germ. Cortés and his army returned and laid waste to Tenochtitlan. The Aztec temples were burned. In 3 months, the mighty capital was reduced to ashes. Cortés would go on to build a new colony on top of Tenochtitlan. Thousands of Spaniards would flock to Mexico City, the capital of Spain's new empire in the Americas.
Try this activity to complement the Aztecs. In Aztec myth, Quetzalcoatl was prophesied to return and reclaim his throne. What is a myth? How is it different from fact? Create a myth that the Aztecs might tell about the landing of the conquistadors. Segment 2, Cortés and the Quest for Glory.
Less than 2 decades after Columbus explored the New World, another Spanish expedition set sail. Its leader was Hernán Cortés, a man whose ruthless pursuit of fame and fortune would change the destiny of the Americas forever. Inspired by Columbus, Cortés had a very different agenda: conquer or die. In April of 1519, a strange sight appeared off the eastern coast of Mexico. The natives didn't know what to make of the huge Spanish ships or the light-skinned men they carried. Nor did they understand the language of the Spanish priest, who ordered them to submit to God or face the consequences. But when the Spaniards brandished their weapons and began destroying Indian idols, the message was clear. Hernán Cortés had brought with him terrifying new weapons never seen or heard in America: guns, armor, and horses. Despite being outnumbered 20 to 1, Cortés quickly achieved his first major victory in the New World. The defeated Indians told him of the Mexica, the Aztecs, a great civilization in the heart of Mexico overflowing with gold. This was what Cortés was after. The lust for gold had brought him to the New World in 1504, to the Spanish colony of Cuba. He had made a small fortune mining gold there, but craved even greater riches. Inspired by this news of the Aztecs, Cortés marched up the eastern coast of Mexico, determined to establish the first Spanish settlement there. The result was Veracruz, where Cortés created his own city with its own laws and its own authority, in direct defiance of Cuba's governor. Cortés's men knew this was an act of treason, and a group of them turned on him. They secretly plotted to take one of the ships and return to Cuba. Cortés responded with his boldest move yet. He ordered all his ships burned. The man who lived by the words "conquer or die" had just given his troops no other options. In the weeks ahead, slogging through the jungle in their armor, the Spanish must have thought conquest was out of the question. With every step inland, they found evidence of the mighty Aztecs, including temples unlike anything back in Spain. Word of these foreign invaders had traveled 200 miles west to Tenochtitlan, the fabulous Aztec capital and home of the Aztec ruler, Montezuma. The 50-year-old Montezuma ruled a vast empire of 25 million subjects and commanded an army of 400,000 warriors. Yet he didn't know quite how to handle the Spanish army of just 500 men. Reports sent to Montezuma said that the Spanish leader, Cortés, with his pale skin and black beard, resembled the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl had been banished on a raft of serpents in the distant past, but legend had it he would one day return for revenge. The legend was enough to put doubts in the great Aztec leader's mind. If Montezuma could have seen the Spanish struggling up 8,000 feet of mountainous terrain, he would have known they were no gods. Forced to scavenge for food, the Spaniards began to weaken. Morale plummeted. Many succumbed to illness. Cortés feared another mutiny. Then, in no condition to fight, the Spaniards ran up against the Tlaxcalans, a powerful tribe and enemy of the Aztecs. Cortés knew he couldn't defeat them. An alliance was his only hope. Cortés's dreams of conquest were saved by a young woman named Malanache, or Dona Marina in Spanish. She had been given to Cortés by the first Indians he defeated. Malanache had been a child slave of the Aztecs and spoke their language, Nahuatl, as well as Maya. She used her skills as a translator to help forge an alliance between the Spaniards and the Tlaxcalans. Suddenly, Montezuma had a serious foe to contend with. In November of 1519, Hernán Cortés finally led his men, plus 40,000 Tlaxcalan warriors, to the island city of Tenochtitlan. After first claiming that he had come in peace, Cortés placed Montezuma under arrest in his own palace. By January of 1520, the great Aztec Empire now belonged, in name at least, to Spain, and so did all its treasures. Things couldn't have been better for Cortés except for one thing. Cuba's governor had sent a fleet to arrest Cortés and execute him for treason. Cortés had to leave Tenochtitlan and return to the coast. Confronted by the governor's men, he told them of the vast Aztec riches still left to plunder and convinced most of them to join him. When Cortés finally arrived back in Tenochtitlan, however, he found his position turned upside down. The men Cortés had left in charge were under attack by the Aztecs and had lost control of the city. Cortés tried to force Montezuma to pacify his people, but the emperor ended up dead, either stoned by his own people or killed by the Spanish. No one is sure which. Cortés's dreams of conquest now seemed doomed. But, as it turned out, the Spaniards had brought with them something far more deadly than cannons: smallpox. This deadly and contagious virus devastated the Aztec population. Cortés regrouped his forces and laid waste to the weakened empire. Cortés returned to Spain 7 years after conquering the Aztecs. His triumphs helped introduce a new word into the Spanish language, conquistador. But Cortés was still driven by his personal motto, conquer or die. He squandered his fortune searching for new lands to conquer, and finally died outside the Spanish city of Seville on December 2nd, 1547.
Try this activity to complement Cortés and the quest for glory. Using a Venn diagram, compare and contrast Aztec culture to Spanish culture. Write a paragraph describing the similarities and differences. Segment 3. Pizarro in the Empire of Gold.
They were the most powerful people in South America, and richer even than the Aztecs. They were the Inca. In 1531, a Spaniard named Francisco Pizarro set out to conquer the mighty Inca, one of the greatest civilizations on earth. Driven by his greed for gold, this uneducated Spanish soldier led an army of just 168 men against an empire of 20 million. The year was 1527. A Spanish ship off the coast of Peru intercepted a raft filled with fine textiles, silver, and gold. To Francisco Pizarro, the captain of the ship, this floating treasure chest was a sign. The mythical city of gold called El Dorado must exist. Setting down on the coast of Peru, Pizarro had no idea what he was about to go up against. The Inca Empire stretched 3,000 miles through the length of the Andes mountain range, covering parts of present-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. The empire had been forged by a man called Earthshaker, who marched through the Andes in 1438, conquering all the Inca's rivals. In less than 100 years, culminating in the rule of Huayna Capac, Inca armies had conquered half of South America, absorbing 20 million people into their empire. Had Pizarro known the Inca armies numbered 100,000, he might have thought twice. The Incas were not just warriors. They had built a sophisticated network of roads more than 14,000 miles long. They had fortified cities in every corner of the empire, and a vibrant economy based on agriculture. They were a devout people, practicing a religion based on sun worship. The rich Inca economy operated without money or writing. They communicated by a system of knotted cords called quipos, carried by swift messengers who linked every region to the imperial capital, Cuzco. About the time of Pizarro's chance discovery of the gold-laden raft, the Inca messengers were relaying tragic news. The emperor Huayna Capac was dead. Two rivals claimed the Inca throne. Pizarro would arrive just in time to exploit the power struggle. In addition to the civil war going on, smallpox, brought to Mexico by Spaniards, had swept across the continent. Half the empire's population had been wiped out by the contagious disease. Fighting for control of the weakened empire were the previous emperor's son, Huáscar, and his half-brother, Atahualpa. Atahualpa triumphed, but his victory would be short-lived. Climbing from the coast high into the Andes, Francisco Pizarro and his 168 men marched into the heart of the war and disease-torn Inca Empire in 1532. The Incas had never seen horses before, and many were very afraid, but Atahualpa was unimpressed. The emperor and 8,000 of his men went to meet Pizarro, unarmed. What they didn't know was that Pizarro was plotting a bold military gamble. When Atahualpa and his men arrived, the Spaniards ambushed them. It was a brutal massacre. 8,000 unarmed Inca were killed by 168 Spaniards. The Emperor Atahualpa was taken prisoner. Over the next few weeks, the situation grew tense. An army of 80,000 Inca soldiers waited for the order to attack. But Atahualpa never gave it, for fear he would be killed. The emperor tried to buy his way out of trouble. He promised Pizarro 3 rooms full of gold and silver in exchange for his freedom. When the precious metal began pouring in, the treasure only made the Spaniards want more. Pizarro's men raided Inca cities and their temples, stealing religious icons made of gold and silver. All told, the Spaniards melted down 30 tons of Inca artifacts. Having served his purpose, Atahualpa was executed by the Spaniards in July of 1533. Pizarro feared the emperor's army would now attack. But when news of Atahualpa's death spread across the empire, the Inca's enemies were thrilled. Tribes from the south, hoping to gain control of the whole empire, pledged their support to Pizarro. Pizarro crowned Tupac Hualpa emperor to pacify the Incas, though Pizarro was really in charge. Then, in November of 1533, Pizarro marched 750 miles south and occupied the imperial capital, Cuzco. His fortune made, Pizarro would continue to build new Spanish cities throughout the former Inca Empire, including the new Spanish capital, Lima. But luck would finally run out for the man who overthrew an empire with a handful of men. Pizarro was killed in Lima just a few short years after founding his glorious new capital.
Try this activity to complement Pizarro in the Empire of Gold. The Incas had a unique way of communicating messages with quipos, or knotted cords. Create a system of communication that does not use speech or writing. Write a message with your new method. For a free educator's guide, call 1-888-892-3484 or find us on Discovery School Online.
The preceding program is part of Cable in the Classroom, a free service of the cable communications industry and your local cable company.